All right, so this is going to be another applied review. Um, in this one, we're going to go through authentication, which is a really important part of securing any of your web applications. This isn't meant to be some kind of comprehensive review of every kind of authentication issue because that would take forever. This is just meant to be an introduction to some authentication issues and a showcase of a few examples that I found. These might help you develop your own methodology or at least just become familiar with some of these topics if you weren't already. So we'll get right into it and talk about what authentication is. This is the definition from the Burp Suite labs that I'm basing this series off of. But authentication is just the process of verifying that a user is who they say they are. Because a lot of websites are exposed to the public, obviously you need some kind of way to authenticate who is and isn't going to be able to get in there. And we'll touch on this in a little bit, the difference between authentication and authorization, but authentication can take, basically there's three main categories. It's either something you are, something you have, or something you know. So something you are would be, a biometric, be that a picture of your face that they have a copy of, or a fingerprint, or a retina scan, or your DNA, or whatever. Something you have could be a physical key, like you're getting into your car, or your house, or your office. Or it could be, your phone's one-time password, your Google Authenticator, your Microsoft Authenticator, or like a YubiKey, for example. And something you know could take the form of, either a shared secret, like your date of birth, your social security number, because sometimes your employers need to know that to verify you. In other cases, it could be, something like just a password, for example. But let's talk about something that can be really confusing early on. That's the difference between authentication and authorization. So as we said before, authentication is the act of making sure that a user is who they say they are, and authorization is actually granting them whatever privileges they're allowed. So authorization is determining whether or not someone's allowed to perform a certain action. And a really good way to demonstrate this is making a purchase at like a liquor store in the United States. So, if I go to the liquor store in the United States and I go to the cashier once I've made my selection, I get a six-pack and I set it on the counter and they're going to say, okay, can you present me with an ID? And most of the time it's going to take it's going to be a driver's license or, maybe a passport if you don't have a driver's license, but you probably have a driver's license if you got there. And you'll present it to them, and first thing they're going to do is they're going to authenticate that you are the person who's on that license. They're going to look at you, they're going to look at that picture of you, and they're going to use those two things to kind of verify, okay, this person is the person who this license is for. Obviously, you can't present a license that's for somebody who looks completely different than you, because then it's obvious that it's not your license. Sometimes cashiers will even ask you questions like, hey, what's the address on this, or what's the date of birth, to try and determine whether or not it's fake. But moreover, to authenticate that it's not only is it you in that picture, but it's a legitimate license. Once that authentication process is finished and they've determined that this is indeed your license, then they move on to the authorization step. So they look at the date of birth and determine that you are of the legal age to purchase whatever you want to purchase, do a little bit of mental math, and they say, okay, you are above 21, so you are authorized to buy, this six-pack of, Bud Lights or whatever. So in this case, there's two types of authentication. It's something you are, right? The physical appearance matching that's on the license. And then there's something you have, which is the fact that you had to have obtained this license from, the United States government, who would have done their own stuff, like a DMV, to verify who you were, with other authentication stuff. And the fact that that license is legitimate and that you are the one who has it, is another piece of proof that you can give to that cashier to authenticate yourself. But let's move on and talk about, what happens if this goes wrong, right? In this case, there's plenty of impact that could happen. And we'll talk about a real example first, using kind of the same method. So let's say I'm able to go to, the self-checkout line at like a grocery store. And if I'm trying to buy liquor there or cigarettes, cigarettes are a little bit more controlled, but let's say I'm trying to buy alcohol. And I go to the self-checkout, it's going to beep and it's going to wait for a cashier to come, and they're going to have to type in, their employee number and maybe a PIN. And when they do that, there could be some kind of flaws to those vulnerabilities. In this case, I talk about, there's two here, there's brute forcing and there's logic flaws. So if they have a PIN that's, an employee number that's 4 numbers and a PIN that's maybe 4 numbers, you could sit there without the employee coming and just brute force that PIN until you figure it out, and then all of a sudden you don't need the cashier to verify your driver's license anymore. Or there could be logic flaws. In this case, when I was there recently, the cashier just walks up and, presses the button and then types in their employee ID and their PIN. In this case, their PIN was just a bunch of ones. So, that would make brute forcing easier. But that logic flaw there is more over the fact that me as a customer or anybody, within, a couple, within like 10 feet, would be able to actually see that password and use it to authenticate. Not to authenticate, but they could use that to bypass authentication entirely and then authorize the sale and purchase. So those vulnerabilities can arise because of either a problem in brute forcing prevention or some kind of logic flaw in the way that the authentication and authorization is implemented. In this case, bypassing it completely. But there's different types of problems that you'll have. If it's a website that holds confidential data, maybe your impact is that all this user's data might as well be public because the threat actor took all of it and sold it online or published it for everyone to look at. But we'll move on and kind of talk about passwords, or at least password-based logins, then we'll move on to multi-factor and other versions. So password-based logins have a little bit more depth to them than the example that I laid forth. And in this case, right, most of the time it's just going to be something is your password. And you're still going to be vulnerable to the same handfuls of things, but this one is mostly vulnerable to brute forcing, right? You lock yourself out of your phone or your house or something, maybe you forget your garage codes, you might try, a handful of codes, and that's effectively brute forcing. And one of the most common countermeasures for brute forcing is going to be, account locks. So it's a countermeasure, but, that being said, there's the implementation of your countermeasure is what determines how strong it is. And we'll talk about brute forcing different things. For example, if you have an account on a website, you could practice brute forcing the password all you want, but in order to brute force an account on something, you'll need a username first. So we'll talk about brute forcing usernames, and you can do that in a variety of different ways. One way is, let's say you go on a website and it has an employee page, and you see a bunch of first names, last names, or maybe you go on LinkedIn, you see that, and you go on a company website and you see, oh, here's like the HR recruiter's email, and the format is, first initial dot last name at company.com. So now, as long as you have the first name and last name of a bunch of employees, you essentially have their passwords and maybe even their usernames, or not their passwords, whoops. If you have the first names and last names of employees, you have their emails, which might as well just be their usernames depending on where you're trying to log in and brute force a login. There's also some default credentials too, like administrator and guest and admin and root on different web applications. So that's something to keep in mind when you're actually enumerating and brute forcing certain usernames. But once you have a username either determined, you can start brute forcing passwords. Now, before I move on to talking about passwords, just because it's really simple, brute forcing usernames is a little bit more intricate, or enumerating usernames. You can fine tune whether or not your username is valid by these three things: response times, error messages, and status codes. And we'll start with status codes. So let's say you have an invalid username, right? You log in with fake name, fake password, and it gives you a 200 status code, sends you right back to the first page, and there's nothing you can do. But you give a valid username like admin and a fake password, and it gives you a 302, and then sends you, a 302 redirect and sends you right back to that first page. Okay, so now I've verified, right, that this is how the web application acts when it's a real username and when it's not. So then you could brute force a list of usernames and just filter out the responses that don't immediately give you a 302 redirect. And you could use that information to figure out what users are there. You can do the same thing with error messages. Let's say you log in with a fake username and a fake password, and it tells you, username is incorrect. But you log in with admin and fake password, and it tells you password is incorrect. Okay, you can use that, string, that regular expression in the response to filter out which ones are legitimate usernames and which ones aren't. You could use that to just enumerate a bunch of usernames. You could do similar things with the response time. Sometimes an application, when you have a legitimate credential, will take longer to reply than when you have an illegitimate username. So if it knows the username isn't in there, it doesn't have to also go look for the password. It just checks them one at a time. Ideally, response times are uniform across requests as best you can. But to kind of touch back for passwords and stuff like that when you're brute forcing them, there's different things, obviously. So you don't necessarily want to always just brute force, every possible combination on the site. You might want to compile a word list, or you might want to do some credential stuffing attacks where you take a a password you know a certain user has used on another thing from a data breach, and use that on this other account that you think they might own. Um, in some cases, users might even change their password routinely to the point where they are using a bad password. So, like, if you think that common passwords like password might be on there, maybe the password requirements require a number, so password one or capital P password one exclamation point. But if users have to change their passwords frequently, they might just throw some trailing ones on the end of there. So those are things to keep in mind when you're actually making your word lists for brute forcing some passwords and stuff. Um, but as far as protections go for, locking and unlocking, if I try too many logins, right, you should lock me after a certain number of attempts. And the question is, well, how do I get unlocked from that, right? If you unlock me based on, maybe, let's say you either block my IP address because you see so many requests for a login come from me, or you lock the account. The question on whether or not it's a secure way to do it is, how are you determining who's getting locked out, and how is somebody getting unlocked? So let's say you lock me out for 2 minutes. It's not really that big of a concern. I can just try the passwords again, or the next one's in the list 2 minutes later. And it's not really an effective way to keep me out. Yeah, it slows me down, but it doesn't stop me. You might also think, okay, well, we'll have all the accounts be manually unlocked. Well, okay, then if I can trigger a lock on everyone's account whose username I can enumerate, then that's just going to cause a headache. You might have me, if I fail to log in so many times, you might lock me out for a period of time and then have me unlock where the next time I log in, you make me complete a CAPTCHA, which could work so long as I can't actually circumvent whether or not I need to complete the CAPTCHA, or if I don't have some easy way to get around it. So that being said, those are just a few straightforward ways that you might be able to bypass password-based authentication. But we'll go ahead and jump into a lab on Hack the Box here in a moment. So let's get started with that. All right, so we're here in the lab. I've started the machine. I've already gone through the trouble of running a port scan, and you can see that it's got an open port on port 80. If we go into our browser and take a look at it, you'll notice that it just seems like a website that lets you look at a couple different like blog posts, seemingly. We can get a little bit of details about, I don't know, we see a Twitter link there, but we're not going to go look. Go to about, not a whole lot. If we go ahead and do some directory enumeration, you'll see, and I still have it running just because I threw it up here real quick. You'll see that it finds a couple of things that are interesting. One of them is a GitHub repository, it seems, which would be worth dumping, but we're talking about authentication bypasses here. So what we're actually going to go look into is this admin endpoint. And this admin endpoint looks like this, right? So it says blooded, it's got a username and a password. And I can try something like admin, and it doesn't really give us anything, doesn't really say anything to us. But the first thing you should do, right, if you know that this is some kind of technology, is try and see if you can get the version number of it, because this doesn't seem to have anything to do with the technology that it's sending forth. And you can see this is just me viewing the page source in this other tab here. And you can see a lot of these things like BL kernel, BL admin themes seem to be referencing version 3.9.2 of something. And if you do some Googling, you'll really quickly find this, blooded 3.9.2 authentication brute force bypass. And in this Python script, it doesn't really give us a lot of details, but I wrote down some notes that I'll talk about after we actually do the exploit, just so we can kind of get some stuff from it. But that being said, maybe if my dir search has pulled it up yet, maybe it hasn't. It looks like it's still going. It got robots though. But one of the other directories you'll discover here is todo.txt. Obviously, to brute force anything, we need a username. And we do get one here, and it's Fergus. You can see, earlier things here: update the content management system, turn off FTP, and FTP looks to be turned off. Removing old users, sure, but Fergus seems to be, if not someone's first name, it's a username. So we will try and brute force that with this. If you look just into the script, you can see that let me zoom in a little so you can see a little better. You can see that the usage is we'll put some kind of login page reference. So in this case, it is going to be admin login. as we see up here, right in our URL. And then we're going to have a user list, which is just going to be Fergus, and then a password list. To make our password list, we're going to use something called Cool. It's a default tool that's installed with Kali, but if not, you can just install it with apt, and it will just crawl this web application, and based on certain things that it finds, it will generate a word list. It doesn't take super long, as you can see. It already generated. If I do cat, you can see it generated not a crazy number of passwords, but a decent amount of at least keywords that will help it move along. I don't think these are necessarily supposed to be passwords. Keywords might be a better definition. But I've already gone through the trouble of just copying this and writing it to a file. So we can go back to our terminal here and run this exploit. Before I forget, you'll want to have a user's file that just has Fergus in there if you're doing this specific machine. Maybe you find more out in the wild, then you'll use that. But we'll go ahead and run it. You can see it's testing all these different keywords. So there's the username and the password to the right. I don't think this will take that long, but maybe it'll take a little bit more than a minute, but I'll use that time to talk about it. So there's a blog post that does a really good job of explaining it that I've linked in my blog, but basically, Bloodit utilizes a function called getUserIP in its PHP code, and you can see, look at that, it already worked. So if we go back to the site, let me just copy this to my clipboard here, and we'll do Fergus, and you can see it logged this in just fine. So there's authentication bypass, but we'll talk about it in a little bit more detail. So Bloodit utilizes a function that gets the user IP address that actually checks for the X-forwarded for and client IP headers in the request. So that means that the IP address of the end user is easy to change just because it uses those host headers. And we can actually, if I look in this brute-forcing script, I can actually show you what that looks like. So this is just some usage stuff. Let's see where it actually is. Right here you can see the user agent is just Firefox. The refer is the login page, X-forwarded for something with a password, token. Where is the headers that they should be messing with in this? Headers location, maybe. So they should be randomizing the headers. Should be in here. Either way, while I'm looking for this, the validation of the IP addresses that we actually submit, it should be, why am I blanking? UP, username, password, that's fine. Use credential, word blocked. Read lines, it might be just that. There's also the CSRF token that it will grab. I don't think it actually verifies this either. Input type hidden, but you can see that it does go to the URL and actually grab that that token, which if we go to the login page, we should be able to see it. It's not going to be there, but if we look at the page source from the original login, you can see the token CSRF that's right here. But I'm surprised I'm not seeing this. It's always using localhost, directory, specifying headers. It must just be the refer is fine. Anyway, what it doesn't do is it doesn't verify that the headers that you supply utilize. It just doesn't verify that the IP address you're submitting with is legitimate each time. So you can just verify your IP address, or not verify, you can randomize your IP address for each request. So even though they have rate limiting, that your IP address has to be different for each request, it doesn't actually work as intended because it doesn't check. And because the thing that it is checking, actually let me just see if I can find the version of this here. I search for it. Here we go. Here's a good blog post for it. This is the one that I read through. This is the get user IP request I was talking about, and it uses these different forwarded for headers to look. And because these are all things that the user can control, right, you can just change those values for each request. And if the application isn't verifying that those IP addresses are legitimate, then you can basically just keep brute forcing passwords to your heart's content, and it won't actually lock out the account if you switch enough times. So there's a brief walkthrough of that one, but next we've actually got one more lab to go through, and that is Hack the Box Timing is what it's called. So I will hop out for a second, then we'll be back with that one. All right, so this is the timing machine lab that we were talking about a second ago. So I've got it spun up. I've already opened some things. And first, when we go to the website, we're confronted with a login page. I can try a couple things. Invalid username or password. Let me try like admin pass. Try to log in. Okay, same thing. So the error message isn't really telling us anything. I'm assuming that admin is a legitimate name here. We could try a few other things, but this machine has a local file read, or maybe not local file read, but indirect object reference with PHP. So there's another endpoint that you can enumerate that's images, and if you try to do the escape strategy, right, it'll tell you that it detects it. But a workaround for this is you can just use the PHP filter to convert whatever this resource ends up being into base64. So if I press enter, right, it makes this big long base64 string that we can copy and decode to get the file contents. So I've already got it thrown in here. It's just echo that content that the page spit out, base64-d. And you can see it works just fine. The only people on here that actually have a shell, I think, are root, and there should be one more, Aaron here. So they're the only ones that either have a home directory or a shell that they can call to. So Aaron does seem like a legitimate username. But to take this, another step further, we can actually take this login request and capture it in our burp proxy. So I'll turn on intercept. I will set up my proxy here and just try. And you can see it's a post request to login.php, and it just has my username and password, and then a PHP session ID here. So nothing out of the ordinary. We'll send this to the repeater and see that, it gives me a 200 OK, but obviously it has this invalid username or password. I'll copy this in my repeater, and instead we're just going to try like admin. The response codes are the same, but you might have picked up on that. I can send this malicious one as many times as I want, right? And down here you can see it's 31 milliseconds for that response time. It's always pretty short, hovering around 30, 33. Every time I do this admin though, a username that I believe to be correct, you'll notice, it almost consistently, right? It takes about like 1,050 or so more milliseconds to respond. So that's tipping me off, right? Okay, maybe the backend application takes a little bit longer because it knows that this username is correct. It says, oh, okay, yeah, we have that in our database, but let's see if this password matches. And maybe that's the reason the response time is taking so much longer. So that little discrepancy there between a username we know, probably isn't true and one that we know. Well, we can also double check this by trying Aaron is our target. And it looks like that one also returns a really long response time, 1,000 milliseconds. Obviously not really that long, but comparatively, we can use that information to figure it out. And let's say, let's say that we didn't have the ability to do this, or if you wanted to just automate this process, right? Because let's say we didn't have the username Aaron, you could actually just take this request and send it to your intruder. And the sniper type is fine. We'll make the username our payload position. We'll go to our payloads, and we'll say that it's still a simple list, and we can load, I think I just have a list of usernames here from Portswigger, so we'll just load those. I think it's just 100, and then we're just going to add Aaron, Gabe2, just a couple more at the end. Another thing, because we're going to be analyzing this based on the response time, you're going to want to make sure that in your resource pool, you're having it send them at one concurrent request at a time. That way, you're not going to be sending multiple requests and having to be confused based on how quickly they came back, because you won't be able to check if you don't change those things. But now that we've got that all sorted, we should be good to actually kick off the attack here. This is the free version, so it's going to throttle our attack a little bit, but that's fine because we're doing it one request at a time anyway. We're going to go to our columns, make sure that we can see when the response was received and completed. You can see admin again. We know that Carlos, root, those don't seem to be real usernames. They're having a really short response time, but admin seems to be pretty long. And we can let this go here, and I'll just wait until it's finished. Maybe I should have moved those up, but yeah, you can see we did admin, I guess, 2 times in this word list. Administrator gives a longer than normal, but that might have been a regex thing with admin and administrator. Hard to say, but you can see there's a pretty big difference between these response times. But I will just wait and then cut to when this scan ends, because we know that Aaron is very much towards the end, so that'll take maybe a minute of our time. All right, so the attack is finished, and we did, see something that our testing verified, that Aaron appears to be a legitimate user because his response time is notably larger than users we know to be false. So let's go ahead and turn off our proxy here. And we can just try a couple password combinations and see if it works. I might have to refresh this page here to get it to work. We'll try a password. Okay, still wrong. You could brute force this, but if you actually just try Aaron for the username and password, you'll notice that it actually lets us log in. So this is kind of a compromise of 2 things. First is the brute force logic type thing. So you'll notice, right, it didn't lock us out after however many failed login attempts, even though they're all coming from the same host, right? Any of these has my that's the target host. What am I thinking? It doesn't look like it actually checks to see what our IP address is, at least not in the headers here. So that's one thing. It's not rate limiting us when we're actually testing all these logins, which would have made sense earlier in the repeater when we were trying admin Aaron over and over again. But the other thing is that it allows for these weak passwords, right? So you shouldn't be able to set the password to be the same as your username. You should require a little bit more complexity and a little bit more robustness for your passwords. So that's just another thing to consider that could have been changed here. Obviously, the response times, you should try to normalize those across most of your requests. If that means the users have to wait a little bit, that's fine, as long as it means that an attacker might not be able to circumvent whatever authentication mechanisms that you're using. So that's the end of this one, but next I think we can jump into vulnerabilities that you'll find in multi-factor authentication. All right, so next let's go ahead and talk about vulnerabilities you might find in multi-factor authentication. There's definitely a few. One of the key concepts to remember with multi-factor authentication is you want to make sure that you're authenticating any 2 of the big 3, being something you are, something you have, and something you know. Obviously, over the internet, biometrics are kind of hard to do, but you do see that kind of pop up here and there. With things like creating accounts on Instagram that aren't linked to a phone number, you might need to supply a picture of your face to verify. And obviously, that verification takes longer, but it's just another way to verify that you're a real person. But there's other ways that these things can be implemented. Most of the time, right, you're implementing this with some kind of token or a code. So I might give you a physical device like a YubiKey, or I might request that you install like an authenticator app on your phone that will give you a code at some given interval that's easy to incorporate. But websites might also send a verification code to like your phone number or your email. Emails and phone numbers are kind of bad for that kind of thing, just because emails are, they're not incredibly difficult to compromise because they're vulnerable to other things, but also storage in emails is somewhat persistent, and you might have your email address on multiple different devices, or your email inbox might be accessible. So that might be a little bit more of a concern. But codes are also sometimes sent through SMS, which means you're vulnerable to SIM swapping, or just a lot more social engineering attacks take place over the phone. So a good example, like there's a Google scam that you'll see sometimes where You might try to sell something online on like Facebook Marketplace, and then somebody will message you and be like, "Hey, can I like send you just a code to your phone number to verify that it's you?" And then, someone who's not paying attention might be like, "Oh, sure." And then the scammer will log into your Google account, and then it sends you the Google authentication code, and then immediately, okay, what's the code that I sent you? And if you're not being vigilant or if you're just not paying attention to where those codes are coming from, uh, that person might be able, you might enter the code and they might be able to get into that account. Um, we'll talk about different ways that people will bypass two-factor authentication. One of those will just be like a simple authentication bypass, right? Where you might um, just not be forced into using the multi-factor. So you might log in to the first page, and then it might redirect you to a second page that just kind of holds you for a second, but it gives you like this pseudo logged in state, and you might be able to just redirect yourself to some kind of login, some kind of page that you'll need to be logged in for, but it won't ensure that you complete the 2FA steps. You might not have to input the code or complete the CAPTCHA or whatever, which would be problematic because then there's no point in it being there, and that requires like a pretty good amount of oversight. Another one that you'll see is a flawed logic example. So in this case, right, you might not be forced to perform both steps, which is kind of what the simple one is, but this one is a little bit more. Let's say that, first we log in with our credentials, right, Gabe and the password, and then it assigns us a cookie. In this case, the cookie is account equals Gabe, and when submitting the verification code here in another second login form, it just has my cookie set here for who that account or whose verification code is being sent to authenticate, or which user is sent to authenticate. If you have some flawed logic, maybe you don't check to make sure that the cookie here that dictates which account is being authenticated um, is the same as the one that they did when they initially logged in. And if you don't, I might be able to just change this cookie to the victim user's username and then submit the legitimate verification code, and all of a sudden, right, I'm able to bypass that step because the check just isn't actually, it's allowing us to get around it if we don't have to perform both steps as the exact same user. So you'll just want to make sure that that sequence is a little bit more tight. There's also, brute forcing, like there is for most things. Some sites won't actually stop you from brute forcing the codes by just logging you out. And even if they do just log you out, right, might just have to automate that process. So if I brute force, like 100 different authenticator codes, and all you do is sign me out, all I have to do is in whatever I'm using to automate that process of trying those codes is just, maybe every 5 requests I have it set to log myself back in and go back to it. So that's something to keep in mind. But next, I think we're good to continue and talk about we'll test out something pretty similar to this in this machine called Altered from Hack the Box. All right, so we're here. We have the Altered machine pulled up, and I'm just going to try and visit it in my browser here. And we can see we're visited, or we're shown this login page here. We can try something like Gabe and password. When it says an invalid username, we could try some kind of legitimate password or maybe default username. And in that case, it does tell us that, admin looks to be a legitimate username. So at least we know that we're looking for something like that. The problem is, if we know we want to get in as admin, that's only kind of half of what we need to do here. What we're going to do in this one is actually brute force the authentication code. So let's say I do like forgot password, and I say Gabe. I submit this. It'll tell me there's an invalid username. But if I do something like admin, it'll actually say that the PIN code was emailed to me. So I'm going to go back here and just capture this request, make sure that my intercept is on. Wait, that's not what I wanted. What I actually wanted to do is we'll submit this. I actually wanted to capture the PIN code request. So if I do like a 1111 and capture this, send it to the repeater, you'll see that it gives me a 200 response code. But the problem with it is, it should tell me here somewhere, Player dashboard, submit, or I must have skipped it. Yeah, here we go. Invalid pin code. Be sure to use the same browser that you requested from. So that's kind of telling us a few things. And there's different ways that we can actually try to brute force this. The one that I'm going to do is just by using FUF, which is just a tool that's developed in Go that helps you fuzz different endpoints. So what we're going to need to take note of is our cookie that we're probably going to have to throw in here. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this to my clipboard. And we're going to start throwing in our command here. So let's try FUF. We'll specify our word list. It's user share. Oops, geez, I can't spell. We'll do, I think, yeah, we want this 4 digits. We'll specify the URL. I don't actually know what it is yet, so I'm just going to put a space there. We can do D, or actually, we're not going to put the data yet. Or actually, yeah, we'll need to put that. Let me just throw the, let me just put that there. The host, or the header for our cookie, and then we can go grab this other information. So, yeah, it's this IP address at API reset token. So let me just /API reset token. And we're going to be fuzzing stuff in the data segment. So we're going to do data. Let me see what that looks like. Okay, name equals admin and pin equals something. So I think I can put this in double quotes also. And we're fuzzing for that. And I think aside from that, we should be ready to kick this off. Whoops, what did I mess up? Should be used with a separator in the header. What did I mess up? FRF token. Oh, I think I know what I did. Need to specify that it's the cookie header. It gave me nothing but errors. That's odd. Let me just double check. 9 reset. Proxy's on. That's a little strange. It should be giving it should be giving me like 302s or something based on what I still have here. Let me try dropping that. Turn off intercept here. Method not allowed. Let me just try and do. We'll try and do the forgot again. Okay, that still seems to be working. I wonder what I might have messed up. It is API /reset token. It might be that trailing slash that I have here. Let me get rid of that. No? What else could I be messing up about this? Let me double check my notes. The word list is fine. The data segment is fine. The header is fine. I do not know what this thing wants from me. I have both of the parts of the session in here. Oh my goodness, now I see it. There. You'll notice all of these give us status 302s, which is not what we were getting in our repeater, right? We were getting 200s. If we go back to this site here and try something, be sure to use the same browser. It's still giving us that. Earlier when I did this, I think, you know what? Let me reset this here. I'll just refresh the page. Maybe, did it give me a different token? I'm not sure. Either way, what should happen here is it should tell you that there's you're submitting too many requests. So I think if I, let me just send this to my repeater and send it again. No, I'm still getting nothing. Interesting. Very interesting. Okay, let me just try running this for a little bit longer. Maybe it takes a lot more requests in a much shorter amount of time. There we go. Okay. So you can see if we try way too much, it gives us an error, too many requests. So if we go back here in Burp Suite and look, I don't think there's there's no header here that straight up just points out our IP address. But there's different ways that you can actually try to work around this. One of them is by just adding like an X forwarded header. But before we jump to that, let's look at the ones that already told us. So it gave us a 200. Let me just send this. Okay, it's still going to be giving me that. But let's say, where would it be? It's invalid. Make sure you use the same browser. So that's telling me that I need to include the user agent. So we're just going to copy this and add that as another header. User agent Firefox. And we're still getting a bunch of 302s, which that might actually have something to do with the fact that our application, or no, that should be okay. Let me actually, here's what we're going to do. Instead of just doing that, let me, actually, we're going to add the header, which is x forwarded for, and we're going to say that we're fuzzing this as well. Now, because we're fuzzing two different values, we need to specify the two different word lists that we're using. And the way that you do that is just like this. We're going to specify that our mode is pitchfork, which will just take two different payloads and switch them each time. So we're going to set this one as fuzz2, and the first one, which is right back here in the data segment, is fuzz1, whoops, z1. And then for the first word list, we can just let it know with a colon which payload we want to use for that. And then we'll just add another word list here for IP addresses. Now I think I already have a list of IP addresses generated. So let me go to, it should be perfect. Okay, and we'll just say fuzz2. I think that should be everything we'll need to kick this off. Let me try it. We're still getting a bunch of 302s. I might need to try again, get a different one. Let's see, we've got this. I might need to get different headers just because, let's try one more thing. Let's try and make sure that no, that should be okay, right? Yeah, all that is fine. Maybe here's what we'll do. We'll also add a content type header and see if that's the issue. If not, then we know that it's Does this have a content type header? It has connection. Oh, here we go. We grab this. If it isn't this content type header, then oh come on. If it isn't this content type header that's giving us the problem, then we know that we probably just need to get other ones. Okay. In this case, it looks like it's returning 200. So all we're doing here, okay, instead of doing that, I'll just walk you through the command. So these 4-digit pins are just all the reset codes that we're testing. So in data down here, we're just making so we're trying the username admin and this pin for each attempt. And at the same time, the IP address goes from my list of IPs and changes each time from the X forwarded for header. So this is just a common workaround if they're blocking you based on your IP address, or if you think that they're blocking you based on your IP address, you can change your X forwarded for header to a different IP. And sometimes if that's what they're checking and they're not doing some other kind of way to verify that, that'll work. It looks like we have to use the content type and the browser just because of something that the app is using to verify the legitimacy of the request or something. But our cookie is still fine. and this should be okay. You'll notice, right, everything might be a 200, so we're going to filter out by the size. So we're going to do, I think it's 2 dashes FS, and we're going to filter, whoops, we're going to filter by size 5650, and we'll just let this run. Hopefully it doesn't take super long, but there are, I think, what is it, however many 10,000 possible reset codes. So this could take a while, this could take a little bit. In my first attempt doing this, it was in like the 2000s range, which was nice. Hopefully we'll get fortunate enough for that to happen. If not, then we might just have to sit here and wait a little bit. So in the meantime, I'm just going to pause the recording while I wait for that to finish. All right, and it didn't take long here for it to find the reset code. So I'm just going to Control C to cancel, and then we can go back to this page, and we might have to do admin. And now we're able to actually change the password. So we're just going to say super amazing pass, submit. And then we can just log in as if we were the admin. So in this one, right, we first enumerated a username by using the password reset functionality. And then we used FUF to brute force the password reset code. And in doing so, we had to first make sure that our requests that it were sending look normal, but also fit the requirements of randomizing our IP each request. So there's that one. Let's go ahead, and I think we can hop back and we'll have one more segment, which is other authentication mechanisms, and then we'll have, I think, 2 more quizzes, and then we'll be finished. So let's move over to those. All right, so now that we've finished talking about the multi-factor authentication vulnerabilities, let's talk about ones that you might just find scattered around them. Obviously, there's other ones than these ones mentioned, but these are just a few to keep in mind. The first of these is going to be functionalities that have to do with keeping users logged in for an extended period of time. Those might be vulnerable just because, right, a remember me token will stop you from having to log in over and over again, and those are going to be stored in your browser's like configuration or cache or somewhere until that token is made invalid. So if there's something like a remember me for 30 days function on a website, that token by itself is kind of dangerous because if somebody else gets their hands on that remember me token, they might be able to just log into your account if they can get their hands on it without needing any kind of thing. So you need to make sure that if you're implementing tokens like that in your websites, that they're very, very difficult to guess, if not like computationally just very, almost impossible. And the same kind of goes for when you actually reset passwords for users. So you want to make it so that if you do reset or change somebody's password, that you send them that link either in email or with a URL. So if it's an email, that depends on the security of their email client, among other things like we touched on a bit earlier. But the other one is how you're actually generating that URL. So in this case, right, this first one is a really bad example. If you just have reset password for user equals their username, then I can effectively reset anybody's password and go change it without having to log in because it's a password reset function. So that's not ideal. Normally what you should do is if you're going to do it in a URL, you through an email send this URL that's maybe like token equals something, and ideally this is really hard to guess, and you can't use this information to you can't reverse engineer this information as something useful. So some websites might base64 encode a combination of your username and your current system time and maybe like a nonce value, and those are all good, but you need to make sure that you can't actually consistently guess that with enough time. So just assume that, in this case, right, assume that the attacker knows the system and that even with that information, they wouldn't be able to get through. So without any more, waiting around, we can go ahead and move on to this last quiz, which is Hack the Box Extension. So let me jump over to it. All right, so I'm here on the Hack the Box Extension machine, and we're going to go over a couple things. First, I did skip a few steps, one of them being the directory enumeration you need to get to this endpoint. So I'll just explain what I did. First, I went to the login page, and after enumerating other endpoints, let me actually change this to, I might have to go to, there we go. I added it to my host file, the IP address of the machine, enumerated other endpoints, found a dev.snippet.htb that you'll use later in this machine, but for our purposes, we won't touch it, in a mail.snippet.htb that we will use later. I found the login endpoint, but there's another endpoint called management dump. So I captured this login request in my Burp Suite proxy, and then submitted it, a post request with just deleting some of the other data, and you'll notice it gives us this issue, right? Missing arguments. So there is something at this management dump endpoint that it's expecting some kind of argument. We just don't have the right one. So we can actually just change what this argument is. We can use FUF to first figure out what this argument might be. So what I'm going to do is just, we're going to copy this request to a file, and I'm going to save it to extension quiz, because this is where I'm working out. We'll talk about this one later, and we're just going to call this, let me just make it easy on myself here. We're just going to call this post request dot, or we'll just call it post dot request. We'll save it. Let me go back to my terminal here. And you can see there's our post request file that should be ready to go. All we need to do is go in here and edit this, the name of this argument, so that FUF knows that we're trying to fuzz this parameter here. Once we've gone ahead and done that, then we can do FUF, and you can see the stuff that was in there. But we do that, we need to specify that the, goodness, I think that's correct. We need to specify that the protocol we're using is HTTP. And then we can pick out a word list. And I'm pretty sure there's user. Yeah, we'll do seclist, discovery, and then I think it's web content. And then there should be burp parameter names. And then we're going to use, I think we need match status codes all, because we don't want it to filter out 400s like the one that we just saw. And we're also going to filter, we do filter by the regex expression missing arguments. So we're going to say, and what this is going to do is it's just going to take our request, swap out the argument name here, or parameter name, with everything in this word list. It's going to match all the codes. It's only going to use HTTP, and it's going to filter out any regex that contains the string missing arguments. Ooh, wait, I don't think arguments isn't capitalized. Okay, we can fix that here. And it kicks off without an issue. We see method is one of the ones that kicks. I think we won't have to wait too much longer to get the next one that we're going to look at. But again, it also shouldn't take super long, so not something we'll have to worry about for too long. But that being said, let me just wait for this to go. And while we're waiting, I might cut this out, I might not. Let me just look around a little. Okay, yeah, we'll just wait for this to finish. Okay, and just like that, we see the method name we're looking for, which is download. So I can just request download and see what happens. And now it tells me, okay, unknown table name. So it seems like this management dump endpoint is dumping something from a database. If you're, let's try users, right? And you can see users is just like, okay, sounds like a lucrative table name. So I don't think that's impossible to guess by any stretch of the imagination. But you look at users and you see, you look at how long this list is. It's super long, and you'll notice each of these usernames. So we've got like Charlie, who is a, let's see, Charlie is a manager. his user ends right here. This is what each user record looks like. Yeah, I don't think I can make that look any better, but you can see here's the Charlie user. You've got his password, which looks to be a certain hash type. Now, I've already gone through the effort of, or not looking at it, but I've already made a list of these passwords cleaned, and you'll notice like maybe you can't tell from here, but there is, I think, like 800 something here. So it's no small number, and there's tons of them. You could plug all of these into Hashcat to identify what type they are, but you'll notice if you look through here that there are certain users that reuse the same credentials, one of which is Frederick right here. And if I just copy his password hash and go over to like CrackStation and throw it in, you'll notice that it's SHA-256 and his password is password123. So this isn't really, anything relating to what we've done yet. This is just kind of setting the stage for where we are. So we can do Frederick at snippet.htb and throw in password123. And just like that, we've got access to his account. There's another endpoint, which is mail.snippet.htb. Whoops, that's not working. Let's try that. There we go. At snippet.htb. And we'll just log in as him here. And now you can see we've got like an email client. And this is where we actually get into what we're going to be going over for this. So when we go to the like password reset function, so if I log out here, go to get started, and do like forgot my password, and enter Frederick at snippet.htb, you'll see that it will email me a link to reset my password. This is one of the scenarios we sort of talked about earlier. If I refresh in here, it might take a little bit. But you can see we got a password reset notification. And I can send like, I'll just keep clicking this for a little bit and refresh and see. Yeah, so we can get tons of these. And something you'll notice is, or ideally what you would do, right, is only the most recent one should work. But if I pick, this oldest one, let's just try and I'll copy the link, throw it in here. And you can see this old one works, but so does this newest one. And just by me clicking through there, you might have noticed already. So, ideally, only the newest one works because you don't want a really old reset code being able to reset your password. But also, if we click through here, we need to notice something about those reset codes, is that they are only changing the last 3 numbers here. And when I hover over the reset password, you'll notice, right, this link is that reset code, and then the email, Frederick, and then %40, which is just the URL encoded, the URL encoded @ symbol. So, let's go ahead, let me get rid of that, and just take everything before this and maybe see if this has to do with like the username or email address. So I can go here, and I think we can just do like echo, whoops, Frederick. I think we can do that. Okay, so that's not quite the same as what we have here, but it's going to be about the same length regardless because it's 75. Let's try doing Frederick at snippet.htb. It's not the same there either. I wonder if, let's see, Frederick at snippet. Did I spell it right? That should be fine. Maybe it's a little different than I thought it was. Maybe I need to use a. Okay. It must have been whatever this argument is for. But you'll notice, right, that's the same hash that we're seeing in the reset token. So what that leads me to believe is that the website is just taking the email address and then adding a 3-digit code to the end of it, and then that's making the reset URL to reset your password. Also, the fact that we can use these old ones means that regardless of how many reset password attempts we put in, any of them will work. So there's two ways you could go about doing this. You could try, because we can make, because we can do a reset on someone else's behalf, right? And we already know that a lucrative user might be Charlie because he's a manager. We could reset a password for him. But the issue with that is that we would have to brute force the code for that 3-digit code at the end, which isn't infeasible. But what's easier to do is to just spam, because we know that the password reset codes, it doesn't matter if it's the newest one, any of them will work. We can just send like 500 of these password reset requests and then just, guess a couple random numbers, and like 5 or 10 guesses, we'll get it right, just by probability. So let's just do that. So in order to do this, first, let's capture a password reset with, I think it's Charlie is the name, right? Yeah, Charlie at snippet.htb. So let me make sure that my intercept is on. My proxy is turned on as well. Email password reset link. Send this to my repeater. Looks like it works, and it resets to forgot password, which is correct. It'll just reset us there. We follow the redirection, make sure it works. They've emailed it. Okay, that's perfect. So we should be getting a 302 and then a 200. So now I think what I can do is just, let's try, well, first we'll grab this. You know what? I think they'll both work out the same way, but we also want to try and figure out the other thing. So let me go back to Burp Suite, turn this off, and see here. Inertia, that's fine. Forgot password. Let me do the follow redirection. Okay. Let me capture what one of these links looks like when we render or not when we render it, but when we actually go to it. So send this to the repeater, send. Gives us a 200. Maybe that's not what I'm looking for, but let me go back here and forward this. Okay, so let's say, and let's say this is what a password reset looks like. So knowing this, right, we should be able to change this for afterwards. We'll do Charlie, and we just need to change Charlie. All right, we got those two changed, and then it should just be these reset password bits. So I'm just going to go in here. All right, so we know that that is going to be the first part of that token. I'm just setting this up for later. You don't have to do this now. And I'm just going to put 3 X's at the end so I remember. I think that looks good. If I send this, it should tell me that the token is invalid, which is correct. So now that we've got that set up, we can take this, this password, this forgot password request here. And when we follow the redirection, of course, email do the password reset link. Perfect. So what we can do now is just copy this request here. So let's do copy this as a curl command. I'm going to go into another terminal, and I'm just going to do nano make, or we'll do make we'll just say spam.sh. So here's the curl command for that, what do you call it? That post request or get request. Yeah, it's a post request. And then we can just save that as it is. And then we just want to repeat it a certain number of times. So we're just going to do for I in. I've already got it right here from when I did it yesterday, but all we're going to do is execute that curl command using this bash script 500 times so that we have asked for 500 different password reset codes. So we'll press enter and you can see it going. And we'll just let this kind of go. The idea behind this is kind of like I explained before. It shouldn't be too difficult to guess a legitimate password code because it doesn't invalidate the previous ones. So the password reset codes could be anything from 1 to 500 after we send all of these, assuming that they're still valid, which we know that, as long as we're quick enough, they should be. So we can just go ahead and I'll just start trying here. So back here, I can just do let's just try 1, 2, 3, and we'll do it the same up here. 1, 2, 3. Password token is invalid. All right, let's try 1, 2, 4. Still invalid. It looks like I went through all 500. Let's try 2, 2, 3. Password reset. Okay, 2, 2, 4. Still giving me the link is invalid. Let me just double check and make sure. 3 CPC question mark email Charlie. Okay, that should still be fine. Let's try 2, 2, 5. And again, it shouldn't take too many guesses for this to work. Too many attempts. Oh, okay. Well, we gotta wait for that. We gotta wait some number of seconds. So I guess it does have some brute force protection here, but what we can do is just run this again, and it should give us slightly better odds, right? All right. Maybe it's been 12 seconds. Let's just see. We'll try 226. Okay, let's try 227. Okay, perfect. So one of our guesses worked. 227 is a valid password reset. So let's just try and log in with password. So I'll go back here, turn this off. We go just to snippet.htb. And we'll do password like we set it. And just like that, we gained access to a manager's account. So to summarize, all we had to do was fuzz the argument name first. Obviously, we did some enumeration before that, but we fuzzed the argument name, dumped some credentials, cracked one of those passwords, logged in, and then we could use the password reset functionality to basically just send enough password reset codes to the point where we could log in as Charlie. And that's because, right, as we talked about the, let me go back to my terminal here, and that's because the token was not constructed in a safe way, or the password reset URL wasn't constructed in a way that was hard for us to guess. We could pretty quickly identify that there was some kind of pattern to this, and the pattern was just that the username is an MD5 sum, and then there's a 3-digit PIN after it. So that's all we've got here. But we'll go ahead and wrap up with securing our authentication mechanisms. And these are all kind of like generic that we've talked about, but obviously keep like login credentials secret. Don't or try to avoid disclosing logins. So don't use default credentials like admin. Right. So obviously don't disclose passwords publicly. in any kind of way. Don't disclose any login credentials. Make sure that you're using effective password policies, like we saw in one of the earlier examples, right? A username had the same password as their username, which is a terrible idea. And in the last case, we just brute forced a password and changed it to password. You should have more effective password policies than that actually make it harder for attackers to brute force passwords in the first place. You want to prevent username enumeration where you can, so that means just making sure that your response codes, your password reset functionality, your forgot password, everything doesn't allow you to determine whether or not a user exists, and trying to keep that information out of the public view. The other one is making sure that you have robust brute force protection. So we saw a couple that either block our IP address after a certain number of attempts, or don't let us do however many attempts in a row. But you need to have a little bit more of a robust way to protect. So, for example, like maybe after a failed, a lockout of some kind, you make me fill out a CAPTCHA, or you make the user like verify through some MFA method, something like that isn't easy to automate from an attacker's point of view. You also want to make sure that you're reviewing your authentication logic just so that people can't circumvent it. Never assume that users are going to do what you expect them to do, because they probably won't. And then make sure that you're using proper multi-factor authentication. So, multi-factor authentication methods that are using more than one of the big three methods. And if you take all those steps to secure your authentication mechanisms, you should be mostly safe, at least according to what we know right now. And attacks that are commonly used right now, or at least that should put you in a pretty safe security posture. But that's all we've got to go for today, so that's all we got.